Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Shanae Bowie-Hussey, and I serve as the Vice President of Health Strategies and Chief Strategic Officer for the Riverside Community Health Foundation. On behalf of our Board of Directors, our volunteers, and our staff, I would like to welcome you to the 2020 Southern California Women's Cancer Conference. Although we cannot meet in person this year, we are excited to welcome you virtually. The mission of the Riverside Community Health Foundation is to improve the health and well-being of our community. And through this conference, it is our hope that you are educated, empowered to advocate, and inspired to thrive from the safety and comfort of your own homes. A little history. In 2006, the Riverside Community Health Foundation gave a seed grant to start an initiative that offered free diagnostic services to uninsured, underinsured, and disadvantaged women who were under 40. Shortly thereafter, a group of breast cancer survivors gathered together to reflect on what would have made their cancer journeys a little easier. From that brainstorm, the Pink Ribbon Place, Riverside's first breast cancer center, was born. Today, the Pink Ribbon Place, which is a program of the Riverside Community Health Foundation, is so proud to continue to be client-driven and to offer cancer support services to individuals and families impacted by all cancers. It doesn't matter the cancer type. Through our Resource Center, you and your loved ones can receive no-cost support services that you need to help navigate you through the cancer journey. This includes individual and family counseling, support groups, education, strength rebuilding classes, client navigation, and products. These products include hats, scarves, wigs, prostheses, bras, face masks, and hand sanitizer, and much more than that. Think about it. As women, the matriarchs and caretakers of our families and communities, we often take on far more than we should. But we keep going, and sometimes we forget that we need to focus on ourselves and our own well-being. Why? Because many times, even when we're diagnosed with chronic disease, it hurts more for us to see the people that we love suffer than it is to suffer alone and in silence. Well, today is about you. To care for others, we must first care for ourselves, and today is about caring for yourself. Whether you're attending today as someone newly diagnosed, as a long-term survivor, as a support person, or as a professional caretaker, we hope you find what you need to educate yourself, advocate for yourself and your loved ones, and most of all, thrive. Welcome to the 2020 Southern California Women's Cancer Conference.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Deidre Kutsumpos, and I'm a senior health educator with the Riverside Community Health Foundation. And we'd like to welcome you to Navigating Cannabis for Use of Cancer at this year's virtual SoCal's Women's Cancer Conference. We will be selecting questions and answers during the portion of this talk, so send us your questions via the chat feature through the presentation. Also, if you'd like this talk, click the thumbs up button and drop a comment to let us know. We love hearing from you. And if you need support accessing any of the talks on our virtual conference page, please email us at terry@rchf.org. That's Terry, Terri, @rchf.org. It is now my deepest pleasure to introduce you to the CEO of Radical Health, Eloise Thiessen. Welcome, 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 Eloise. We are so happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Deidre. It's a pleasure, and thanks for having me back this year, even in our virtual world. So I'm really excited to share with you some ways that I have found cannabis to be helpful when you're undergoing chemotherapy or even post-chemotherapy treatment. So a little bit about myself. I am an adult geriatric primary care nurse practitioner, board certified. That's what all those great initials are after my name. As some people have told me, it's about $3,000 an initial. But I have now been working with cannabis patients for the last 6 years. My background is oncology prior to cannabis, and I have about 20 years of nursing experience. As you can see here, I've treated over 6,000 patients who want to use cannabis specifically to treat their symptoms. And the average age of my patient is 76. About 90% of them are cannabis naive. They've actually never used cannabis before, and 85% are female. Most of them are looking for relief from pain and sleep, although I do get quite a few patients who are undergoing chemotherapy because of my background in cancer. And of course, I often hear that they don't want to smoke it, nor do they want to get high. So I just want to start out with a partial list of conditions that we have found cannabis to be helpful with. And when you look at this list, you should have some skepticism. Often people see this and there's a lot of different conditions that they have themselves or they know a loved one has had. And they want to know, how is it that one plant can be so helpful for so many different things? Our answer is called the endocannabinoid system. And this is a very complex system that we just discovered in the early 1990s. And I promise you, I won't bore you with physiology or too much science. But it's important that you understand that this system is a group of lipids, their receptors, enzymes, and neurons. And it's responsible for homeostasis. So really, when we're activating this system, we're trying to make sure that we are getting everything into balance. And things like injury, illness, and inflammation can push us out of balance. We now know that our endocannabinoid system is responsible for maintaining homeostasis with things like our mood, our appetite, our sleep, our memory, and our pain perception. And we now also know that the endocannabinoid system is found in all vertebrate animals and even some invertebrate animals. That just goes to show the magnitude and importance of this regulatory system. And we've been looking at a theory now for the last several decades around how many diseases can be characterized by a deficit, a chemical deficit. We see this with things like Alzheimer's disease, where dementias are characterized by a deficit in acetylcholine. That's a molecule in the brain that affects our memory. We'll also see diabetes is characterized by a deficit of insulin, and Parkinson's is a disease characterized by a deficit of dopamine. Well, now we believe that we actually can have a clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, and this could be a deficit in what are known as our own endogenous cannabinoids, these molecules that we can make on demand to influence that endocannabinoid system that helps keep us in balance. And there's some research, and again, this is theoretical because we haven't been able to actually demonstrate this in large human clinical trials, but we believe that this clinical endocannabinoid deficiency may be behind things like migraines, fibromyalgia, irritable bowels, and some other treatment-resistant conditions. So let's get to the good part. I'm sure many of you want to know, well, what should I take? How much should I take? And how often should I take it? So I want to talk about cannabinoids first. And cannabinoids, as I mentioned, can be endogenous. So we actually do create these molecules that mimic the plant. They can be synthetic, or they can be from the plant. And to understand the benefits of each cannabinoid, we really need to have information known as a cannabinoid profile. This helps us identify which cannabinoid medicines will benefit our condition the most. And this is where it gets very overwhelming for a new and even some experienced users, because there are hundreds and hundreds of different profiles out there and hundreds of different products to choose from in California. It's sort of a blessing and a curse. We have quite a bit of access here compared to other states. However, when people walk into a dispensary, they often feel quite overwhelmed because they don't know what to choose. One of the most common cannabinoids found in the plant, and the one we've researched the most, is THC. And of course, this is the one that people are the most concerned about or most hesitant to try because they're concerned about that quote unquote high that may come with it. And often when I'm talking to my patients, I want to know what that high means to them. And often I'll hear things like, well, I don't want to hallucinate and I don't want to lose control. And with THC, very small doses can actually produce a euphoric effect. And that can look like an improved mood. You can feel a little bit happier. You might feel less anxious. You might feel less irritable. You might be more communicative with your spouse. And often when we talk about it in that way, THC doesn't seem as scary. We know that it can treat a variety of different conditions. And many people, when they hear about THC, they're familiar with its ability to improve our appetite or to help with nausea. But we're also seeing how THC can actually help with anxiety, inflammation, post-traumatic stress, cancers, insomnia, and even pain. And it's a very powerful anti-inflammatory and analgesic. And what you'll see over here is a list of side effects that probably don't even make any sense to you, but some things can happen with THC and it's often dose dependent. So when I'm talking to people who are concerned about possible hallucination, paranoia, or anxiety, I tell them that cannabis has what's called a biphasic effect. So very low dosages will often produce one effect and a large dose can produce the opposite. So for example, very small amounts may help improve appetite or improve our nausea, but a large dose could actually make us feel sick to our stomach, and some people have even vomited from too much. So dosing is really, really important. And sometimes we're using THC to actually create some of these side effects like fatigue, like improved appetite, and even sometimes forgetfulness. With post-traumatic stress, sometimes people feel very anxious around, I've had some patients tell me that October is hard for them because it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I've had people tell me that they get anxious about their upcoming scans. And sometimes THC can help you have some short-term forgetfulness so that you're not focused or obsessed about some of those things you're worried about. We have looked at long-term data and we haven't found anything that shows short-term use of THC causes any long-term memory loss. You'll see at the top, it says that THC is not a COX-1 or COX-2 inhibitor. And what that really means for you is that it can help with inflammation without creating some of those side effects that you can get from over-the-counter anti-inflammatories like your ibuprofen, your Advil, your Aleve. So it doesn't create that stomach upset, it doesn't put you at risk for bleeding, and can really help with inflammation if you're unable to use those types of anti-inflammatories. And again, as I mentioned, in California, we're quite fortunate. The cannabis plant has over 113 cannabinoids, these chemicals found in the plant. And we have access to about 6 or 7 of them in California. And as THC is the most studied and the most readily available, we actually have other components of the plant that can help with symptom management, but have less side effects than THC. THCA is one of them. It's known as the raw cannabinoid in cannabis. So when people grow the plant and it's in its raw form, it actually has a high amount of those nutrients or phytochemicals in the plant. Think about it like with your raw vegetables. We know that raw vegetables are dense in the nutrients, and sometimes we cook it or overcook it and we lose a lot of those nutrients. It's the same concept with THCA versus THC. We now know that THCA is more water soluble. So what that means is our bodies absorb it better and we can use lower dosages and likely have less side effects and even save some money with something like this. And it's not likely to be impairing. So THCA can really help with pain and nausea without some of those euphoric effects that in some people can be difficult to tolerate. So THCA may be a great alternative if you still need THC. And we have less research on it because it's harder to study THCA. It does like to convert to THC, especially if you left it out at room temperature. So what research we have right now is limited, but it does show great promise if we can keep it from going to THC. And often we do that by putting it in the fridge or keeping it in a cool, dark place. But it's certainly showing promise with things like nausea, inflammation, pain, spasms, even neurodegeneration. So diseases like Huntington's, Parkinson's, and even dementia. And then of course we have CBD, which seems to be everywhere. I think of CBD right now like Frank's Red Hot Sauce. They seem to be putting that bleep in everything. I've seen it in tampons, in deodorant. I've seen it where IKEA was considering putting it in their furniture. So I think, it makes it very challenging sometimes to see whether or not CBD could truly be a medicine when it seems to be everywhere right now, especially when I drive home. Sometimes the gas station by my house has a big sign out that says CBD sold here. Many of us say don't buy your sushi at a gas station, and please don't buy your CBD at a gas station. But CBD really is showing great promise, especially for mood sort of symptoms like anxiety and depression. And it can really help alter our mood. We've seen great promise with CBD in a lot of our animal studies, and now we're starting to see some more human studies come out, but it shows great promise with things like inflammation, diabetes, anxiety, depression, bone fractures, insomnia, pain, spasms, psychosis. It has a little bit of a bigger list than THC and shows, like I said, great promise. And side effects, again, are dose dependent. So low dosages of CBD may actually be stimulating, uplifting. People can feel like they've had a little bit of caffeine, so sometimes they get some jitteriness. And bigger doses may actually be more sedating. So I'll talk about what this looks like if you're trying to manage symptoms in a little bit. But it's also the cannabinoid that's most likely to interact with other medications, which I will also address. And just like we have THCA, we have CBDA, which again is the raw form and is likely to be more water soluble. So our bodies actually absorb it better. In fact, we think it's 10 to 20% more powerful than CBD. And if we have CBDA with CBD, it could also increase the effects of CBD. And the reason that this is important to know is that when we look at some of the studies around CBD for dosages, the dosages where people respond are actually pretty high, sometimes 50, 100, couple hundred milligrams. In fact, I was just researching a couple clinical trials going on right now with CBD for pain, and they're looking at dosages between 400 to 1200 milligrams. And that can get quite expensive for somebody who has to pay out of pocket for it. So anything we can do to reduce cost and improve outcomes, CBDA may be more beneficial than CBD. And it's not impairing. We have less research on CBDA than we do THCA, but in my practice, I have found that a lot of times CBDA, because it is better absorbed by the body and a little bit more potent, we see things like improvement with fatigue, concentration, inflammation, and pain. And I do just want to specify that CBD is psychoactive. We often hear, and I see this all the time, that people promote CBD as non-psychoactive. It's not impairing, it's not euphoric like THC, but because it does help alter our mood, it should be considered a psychoactive substance. And sometimes people expect CBD to have no impact on them, but it will. Again, you can have that alertness, you can have that improvement in anxiety and depression. You may even feel some dizziness, which is a psychoactive response. I want to touch really briefly on CBD that comes from hemp versus the cannabis or marijuana plant, because again, because it's everywhere, like our gas stations and even TJ Maxx, it's really important as a consumer that you know what to look for so that you're getting high quality, safe and effective CBD if you choose to order it online. Now, the hemp plant has typically been used for things like industrial purposes, stalks, stems, rope, paper, but the plant can flower, and that flowering part of the plant is best for producing your medicine. What happened in 2018, the reason why we're seeing hemp sold everywhere, CBD hemp sold everywhere, is that the 2018 Farm Bill actually descheduled or legalized hemp. And when this happened, the FDA and the DEA were quick to come out and say, yes, hemp has been descheduled and it's now federally legal, but we still consider CBD to be a Schedule I drug, which has led to a lot of confusion. So these products are sold all over the internet, but they're not regulated and they're not tested. And this is where, as consumers, we really need to be savvy so that we make sure that what we are getting is safe, because these products may contain synthetic cannabinoids or other harmful chemicals. And we do have consumer watch groups who are out there testing these products to determine what's in them. In fact, they produced this research in the Journal of American Medical Association, and what they found was that 70% of products that they found online and tested were inaccurately labeled, with 43% of them being underlabeled, meaning they had less and in some cases zero CBD in them, and 26 were actually overlabeled for CBD content. And the FDA has been really good to send out warning letters to any CBD company that makes false claims. So some of them try to say it'll cure your cancer, it'll cure your pain. In fact, when coronavirus came out, started to really have an impact on us in February and March, we saw some CBD companies selling COVID-19 cure kits with their CBD, and the FDA was quick to come in and shut them down. When you're trying to determine which hemp-derived product is best for you, there's some things that can be really helpful. This is actually considered a hemp plant that you're looking at right here. And a lot of times people will say to me, well, kind of looks like marijuana, Eloise. And it does, because this is the flowering part of the plant. As long as that THC level is 0.3% or less, it can be classified as a hemp product. And this is how they're growing it, marketing and selling it to you online under that hemp bill. This is industrial looking hemp. It's the stalk and stem. There's no flowers on here. So you really want to make sure that if you're going to purchase a CBD product online, that it is advertised as flower derived CBD. Make sure that these products are being tested and tested by a third party facility. Often you'll see what's called a QR code on the product that you can actually take a picture of that QR code and go directly to the lab site so you can review the contents of that test. You want to make sure that it's displaying how much CBD and THC are in that product. Does it have the batch number on it, the expiration date? You want to make sure there's no residual solvents in it. Sometimes these companies have heavy chemicals to extract it. You want to make sure, most importantly, though, for cancer patients, there's no mold, there's no bacteria, there's no heavy metals, and there's no pesticides. Often we consider that an organic product, but because we cannot label these products organic, you can look for organically grown or sustainably grown. But ultimately, that test result will show you what is in this residual product. And now I've been told there's over 4,000 different CBD products available on the market. So not only is it overwhelming to go into a dispensary, but to try to order CBD online. And often I tell people, once you kind of find a product or two that meets your criteria, just stop there. You could spend months trying to go through all these products. Make sure you're avoiding products, excuse me, with toxic additives like corn syrup or other artificial colors or flavoring. Often these products will come in what's called a tincture form, or that liquid form, and they can very much taste like the plant. So it has a very earthy taste to it, and some companies will put in corn syrup or other additives to help mask the taste. But there are companies out there that do use natural flavoring, and that would be my recommendation. Try to find companies that don't make explicit health claims. Again, you'll see companies that will say it cures this or cures that. Steer away. And make sure that the product is not being derived from the seed or the stalk of the hemp plant. Again, you want to make sure it says flower derived. And also, I personally recommend that you avoid companies that want you to make recurring purchases. Unless you know that that product is going to work for you and you're going to be taking it consistently, making recurrent purchases can save you sometimes up to 20% on your product. But don't sign up for that until you know for sure. And also we have what's called MLM, or multi-level marketing companies, where very much like a pyramid scheme, you go in and you purchase these products wholesale in bulk, and then you need to recruit other people to buy and sell these products wholesale. And sometimes people are left with thousands of dollars in products that they can't sell, and you don't need to do that. Okay. So let's talk about different ways that you can consume your cannabis. And there are many ways, which is another great thing about the versatility of this plant. Inhalation is still, believe it or not, one of the most popular methods of consumption. And that is because it reaches our bloodstream almost instantly. Within minutes, we can feel the effects of inhaled cannabis. This is an example of a pre-rolled joint, or what you see on the right next to it is the bud or flower. And many people actually prefer this method because, again, it's the raw form of the cannabis. So it has the highest amount of the cannabinoids and other components in the plant and tends to have more of a nuanced medicinal effect. You also have seen what we call vaporizers, vape pens. Some people refer to them as wax pens. And this was really became quite popular because what the research shows around vaporization is that you're not heating the plant material to the point of combustion. So you're less likely to produce carcinogens or tars. Unfortunately, what we've seen in this industry, because it's unregulated, is that these vape pens here, this is the battery that you're seeing, and the battery really does burn a lot hotter than it should. If you're going to vaporize, you want that temperature to be 750 degrees or less. And these vape cartridges are not regulated. They're often made overseas, and they can burn quite hot. The other challenge is what you're seeing here is called a vape cartridge, and this is the oil in the vaporizer right here. And some companies will put additives in there like propylene glycol or polyethylene glycol, and that's to help with the inhalation so it's not as thick or vicious, or not vicious, the viscosity isn't so thick. And what we've also seen last year was what was called the vape crisis, something known as EVALI, cigarette vaping acute lung injury. And what was happening was people were purchasing these vape cartridges on the illegal or illicit market. And they were finding that these products had something called vitamin E acetate in it, which when it was inhaled was actually causing a chemical burn in the lung. California did not have any reports of this EVALI incidences when these cartridges were purchased through licensed dispensaries. So the state of California does regulate these products and test them quite thoroughly. So fortunately, we didn't have any of those incidences. They were occurring on the gray illicit market. And since they have identified the actual source of where it's happening, so we're not seeing this incidence anymore. But again, inhalation works quickly within 5 to 10 minutes, can last a few hours. But long-term heavy use of smoking cannabis has been associated with airway inflammation and chronic bronchitis. So if someone's going to use inhalation, it usually should be very short-term, and the benefits definitely need to outweigh the risks. So for example, you're on the verge of a panic attack, you have excruciating pain, breakthrough pain, or you have vomiting that you cannot keep anything down with, inhalation may be a remedy to help with those symptoms. And then of course we have tinctures, and this is the liquid form of cannabis, is quite popular. It's a great way to control your dose and start very low and slow. You can start with just a couple of drops. And we have great variety of products with tinctures. Tinctures are generally in the cannabis industry have been oil-based, and oil-based tinctures don't typically absorb in our mouth. So even though people may hold them under their tongue, they may take sometimes 1 to 2 hours to take effect. And I think this is just really important to note because you don't want to repeat your dose too quickly with the tincture. You really want to wait. And in my case with my patients, I make them wait several days before they increase their dose. And that is so we can really determine how it makes them feel. Some tinctures, if they're alcohol-based and put under the tongue, may work within 15 to 20 minutes. But really, make sure if you're going to try this for the first time that you do give it several hours before you repeat it, because if you do repeat it too quickly, now you're going to start over consuming and have very unpleasant side effects. And that is typically what happens with what we call edibles. The state of California is supposed to be testing for homogeneity, meaning that how well these edibles are mixed for dosages, so that if you did need to cut it into a smaller piece, you should have equal dosing. But we're not really seeing consistency with edibles. So they can be a little bit harder to regulate, a little bit harder to titrate your dose. And again, some of these products do not taste like cannabis. They taste quite delicious if people can actually overconsume unknowingly. And so because it takes an hour or two to take effect, some people may actually, repeat that dose too quickly. Or if they do have side effects, they can last for several hours. But a tincture and an edible, when used appropriately, can give you 5 to 6 hours of relief. So they last much longer for chronic conditions compared to inhalation. And then we have topicals. And topicals are balms, salves, lotions, can be very effective at treating localized things like pain, itching, or rashes. They go directly into the skin, but don't typically reach the bloodstream. So people should not feel any systemic or any kind of side effect from it. They typically work in about 10 to 20 minutes and can last for several hours. They may not be effective for pain that's deep in the joints, like your knee pain, your hip pain, and sometimes that back pain. A lot of times I see them effective for muscular pain and even neuropathy. And then we have transdermal patches, and these are actually patches that do reach the bloodstream that are applied topically. And the advantage to these is that they can last for 8 to 12 hours, so even longer lasting relief than your edibles or your tinctures. My favorite thing about transdermal patches is that if you place them on and start to have a systemic side effect, you can actually remove these patches, and those side effects do go away in about 30 or 45 minutes. So it's great for somebody who's really hesitant or concerned or maybe very sensitive to medications to have this kind of control over their experience. They're quite expensive though, so they're not great for starting out unless the benefit really does outweigh the cost of them. And finally, I'm just going to mention suppositories because these typically are marketed to our cancer patients for many reasons. And really, again, the oil and the tinctures and the oil that's used in these suppositories do not absorb well into our mouth or into our rectal area. So it's safe to assume that these are not being well absorbed. They are promoted to have a high absorbency rate in the industry, which is actually inaccurate. They have about a 3% absorbency rate. So what ends up happening is they become quite messy. And anybody undergoing chemotherapy should really avoid any sort of daily administration into the rectal area to reduce their risks of possible infection. So I just want to touch on a few conditions that cannabis may be helpful for in the oncology patient. Again, sleep is one of the top reasons people come to see me. And we actually had some research come out from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And what they did in 2017, which now feels a little outdated, but they reviewed over 10,000 peer-reviewed studies on cannabis. And they looked at the research and they made their recommendations. What they found specifically for cannabis and sleep was that there was moderate evidence that cannabis and cannabinoids are effective at improving short-term sleep outcomes. So we haven't looked at long-term, but we've looked at short-term, especially if the sleep is associated with obstructive sleep apnea, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, and multiple sclerosis. And CBD is often marketed as a sleep agent. Again, as I mentioned earlier, those low dosages of CBD may be stimulating. It's not often that I'll have a patient come in and say, well, I went to the dispensary and I told them that I don't want to smoke it, I don't want to get high, and I need help for sleep. And they were given a CBD product that actually kept them up at night. So sometimes low dosages of THC may be more appropriate for sleep, for falling and staying asleep. But we are starting to see some research come out that long-term use of THC may start to have a rebound effect, meaning that it can start to keep you awake. But looking at whether you're having a hard time falling asleep, sometimes sublingual, like under the tongue, inhalation may work quickly to help you fall asleep. But things like an edible or a tincture that you swallow may be better at helping you stay asleep. And while I mentioned that CBD is marketed as a sleep agent, I do have patients that report small doses of CBD help them with sleep. So it could be the cannabinoid profile that I talked about at the beginning may have different components that are more likely to be friendly for sleep. It could be other medications that you're taking that could potentially have an interaction, increasing that drowsy effect. And CBD is well tolerated in high dosages. So for those who want to use CBD compared to THC for sleep, may find that it's more costly because CBD is expensive. And if you only needed a couple couple milligrams of THC for sleep, but you needed 25 to 50 of CBD, that's where it can start to become cost prohibitive. Appetite issues, nausea and vomiting. Again, we've known for a while that particularly THC is effective at helping with reducing nausea and improving appetite. We're now starting to see that CBD over time may actually suppress appetite. So it's really important that if you are at risk for weight loss or have had appetite issues and you're taking CBD, that somebody is monitoring you to make sure that you are not losing weight or having a decrease in your appetite. And THC, again, is the cannabinoid that's most likely to help you with your appetite, because I know that there's a lot of language on this slide that probably doesn't make any sense. But essentially what it's saying is it's stimulating one of those receptors in our endocannabinoid system to release a hormone. And that hormone is what's helping us increase our food intake and often helping food to taste better. So while you might have an increase in your appetite over time, you're actually going to see this gradual weight gain happen. And we don't believe CBD alone is going to help stimulate your appetite. With chronic pain, again, we are starting to see great research come out here. We know it's not toxic. Cannabis is not toxic like our opioids or other non-narcotic pain medications like your Aleve or ibuprofen. It's not likely to cause side effects. So it has less side effects compared to opioids, and we're not seeing a physical dependence, meaning that people can often stop their cannabis use without any withdrawals. And you cannot overdose on it and have a fatal outcome. So cannabis cannot kill you. And we're seeing human studies where people are using cannabis with their opioids, and they're actually decreasing their opioid intake when they're using cannabis. So there's a nice synergistic effect there. We saw a study, again, looking at THC, because often when people come to me for chronic pain, I do let them know that THC is usually needs to be a significant part of your pain regimen. CBD alone may help, but often you need that THC. And this was a study looking at inhaled cannabis where they were trying to reduce peripheral neuropathy. And this is related or neuropathic pain related to a spinal cord injury. And these dosages of THC are very low compared to what people can purchase in a dispensary. And really the point of this is to demonstrate that very low dosages of THC can be effective at reducing pain. So less is more. Again, walking into that dispensary and getting some advice from the staff behind the counter can be confusing and often may not be exactly what you need. We're seeing that CBD can actually influence things like our other receptors outside of our endocannabinoid system, which can lower our heart rate, it can improve our mood, it can aid in arousal, and it can actually shift that dysphoria that comes with chronic pain. Specifically to cancer, we've seen some research around nausea and vomiting. And again, a lot of language here that probably doesn't make a lot of sense to you guys. But what we've been able to see is that some of our new anti-nausea medications like Zofran or Kytril, these are blocking certain receptors in our body, which is why they've been so effective. We haven't compared cannabis to those medications yet to see if one is better than the other. But we have done trials in humans looking at some of our older anti-nausea medications, and they actually found that cannabis was more effective than those older generation anti-nausea. We do know that many of the different cannabinoids in the cannabis plant can be effective at helping with nausea and vomiting. In fact, CBD and CBDA were shown to be quite effective. So you don't necessarily need THC if you're very adverse to it, or if you've had a bad experience or you can't tolerate it. You do have other options, including THCA, CBD, and CBDA. And there's been, again, a synergistic effect, particularly with acute nausea and anticipatory nausea. And anticipatory nausea is very hard to treat with pharmaceuticals. So we're seeing great research come out about how cannabinoids, when used with some of these medications, can actually help with that queasiness sometimes that people have, even though their anti-nausea medications may be working, they're still a little bit queasy, they may not be vomiting. And some people will actually try to use these cannabinoids versus their Zofran or Kytril because of the constipation or other side effects like headaches. So again, we know that they work well together. They're safe to take together. We're not able to, demonstrate in research whether cannabinoids are superior to your anti-nauseas that are currently recommended. And this was a study actually done in pediatric patients, and it was done in 1995. So it's an old study, but really what it demonstrated that they gave 480 treatments of cannabinoids to these pediatric cancer patients over 2 years and had a 100% success rate at controlling their nausea and vomiting. So we have these really small clinical trials that do show a lot of promise. And they had no major side effects, which is really promising and encouraging. But I think in this population right here, what will be most important for you to hear is how cannabinoids can help with chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy. And these two studies, again, were done in animals and not humans. But most interesting was the use of CBD with paclitaxel, which is often given quite a bit in our breast cancer population. And paclitaxel can cause that peripheral neuropathy. And what the animal study demonstrated was that the rodents that received CBD prior to getting their paclitaxel did not develop chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy. And the CBD did not have any negative effects on the anti-tumor effects of that chemotherapy, which is really exciting. They also looked at 2 other chemotherapy medications that are known to cause peripheral neuropathy, oxaliplatin and vincristine. What was interesting about that study is that CBD alone didn't help, nor did THC alone help. But together, CBD and THC were most effective, which is known as an entourage effect. So in some cases, people will find benefit from both. And Israel is the leader right now in terms of some human clinical research for us to help us understand how cannabis is really helping with different symptoms. They actually did a prospective analysis looking at medical cannabis in patients with cancer. And what they found was that these different components like indica, sativa, high CBD, or what's called a 1-to-1 CBD and THC were all used among these different cancer patients. And they saw significant outcomes. They saw almost 96% reported an improvement in condition. They saw that almost 53% who were having pain levels of 8 out of 10 prior to cannabis had significant improvement because only 4.6 reported that same level of pain after using cannabis for 6 months. 18% reported good quality of life 6 months after cancer treatment. 91% reported improvement in nausea and vomiting. We saw 87% improvement with sleep and restlessness. We saw an 84% improvement in anxiety and depression, an 82% improvement in itching, an 81% improvement in headaches. And even more importantly, they saw 35% of patients decrease the need for analgesics, sedatives, steroids, and opioids. So they were actually able to reduce some of their pharmaceutical intake when they consumed cannabis. And this is really important. I like to bring this up because, again, it feels very counterintuitive to recommend something like inhalation, especially in a cancer patient. I often get strange looks like, are you really suggesting inhalation, Eloise? Well, and sometimes I am, because sometimes the benefit does outweigh the risk. And we have quite a bit of data looking on inhalation of cannabis and whether or not it affects our lungs to the point where we can develop lung cancer or head and neck cancers. And in fact, they did some research back in 2015, and they looked at cancer patients and then matched them for cancer-free patients. And what they found was that cannabis use, and this is through inhalation, did not result in higher rates of lung and pharyngeal cancer, whereas tobacco smokers were at greater risk the more they smoked. In fact, tobacco smokers who smoked cannabis were at slightly lower risk of getting lung cancer than tobacco-only smokers. So they think there's some protective mechanisms there. Again, we know it can be good anti-inflammatory. But people really shouldn't be smoking cannabis every day, all day. I don't think that's the point of this. The point is to let you know there are ways to use inhalation safely and short term. And again, the National Academy of Sciences came out and they did their research on pain as well with cannabis, and they actually said there was conclusive evidence to support that cannabis is effective at reducing inflammation, modulating pain, boosting those pain medications, analgesic effects, and shifting that dysphoria with pain. And lastly, I'm just going to end here with anxiety and depression, which sometimes can be a long-lasting effect, something that people have been struggling with their whole lives, or it can be part of the prognosis, diagnosis. We've seen that a lot of people who use THC in cannabis are reporting that they're seeking relief from depressive symptoms. There's definitely research coming out that chronic heavy users of THC can actually develop depression. So while THC can lift that mood and produce some euphoria and can be great, we really want to make sure that people are being monitored so they're not getting to that point where now they're exhibiting more depressive symptoms because of their use. And we are seeing that the endocannabinoid system, again, is playing a significant role in regulating our mood, and that dysfunctional endocannabinoid system may be contributing to our depression. We know that CBD can interact with many receptors outside of our endocannabinoid system, particularly our serotonin and TRPV, and these receptors help regulate our fear and anxiety related behaviors. They went back and they did a study in 2015 that looked at clinical CBD studies for anxiety and oral dosages. And you'll see here it ranges from 15 milligrams to 600. And I show this because the question I get most frequently is, okay, how much do I take, Eloise? And I usually say it depends. And this is why people really respond all over the place. But the good news is that it was quite effective at lots of different types of anxiety, including generalized, social, panic, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress, and even reducing some of the THC-induced anxiety that people can experience. And this study done last year really looked at CBD dosages for anxiety and sleep. And what they found was that around 25 milligrams was most effective for anxiety. So you will see more and more people kind of trying to achieve that 25 milligram dose of CBD for anxiety. And the higher dosages were better for sleep. So above 25 and as high as 175 milligrams a day. Most of the products that you're going to find, though, are artisanal. So it does require self-titration, and this can be one of the most challenging things. I know many of you may have asked your oncologist or your nurse practitioners maybe for some help or advice on cannabis, and they may not know. So if you really do want to consider cannabis, consider working with a knowledgeable cannabis clinician who can help you understand how to self-regulate and self-titrate this medication for best outcome. And while drug interactions are possible, they're rarely so dangerous that I have to have someone discontinue the use of their cannabinoids. But there are definitely medications, particularly CBD, can increase or decrease the effectiveness of your other medications. So if you are on important oral chemotherapy or anti-hormone therapies, again, please talk to a knowledgeable clinician who can help determine if cannabis is safe for you. All right, I'm ready for questions. How'd I do there?
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Eloise. We're really appreciative of you sharing your insight and your research and your knowledge about cannabis use for cancer. Just like she said, it's time for questions. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We are eager to hear what you want to know and want to make sure that we tailor this question answer session to you. So thank you so much for participating in that way. But we do have a question right at the top, right out of the gate, Eloise. I'll let you get another sip of your coffee, and I really like your mug. It's adorable. Is it illegal to have cannabis with you, or do you need to have a medical card with you too if you're carrying cannabis?
That's a great question, and it's one that I'm probably going to answer with some confusion. So cannabis is still considered a Federal 1 drug, which means it's federally illegal. We have 33 states plus the District of Columbia that do have medical cannabis programs. So in your state, you are protected under those medical programs if you have a medical card. If you try to travel to another state, even if it's a legal state or a medical state, or you left your state with your medicine, that is considered illegal. In the state of California, we are adult use, so you do not necessarily need a medical card, although there are some counties and cities that still require it for you to purchase it. The medical card at this point has very little benefit. You can get a letter from a physician. You take that letter to your county to get the county issued card, that state issued card. That will save you some money on taxes, about 15%. But unless you're spending several $100s a month, the tax saving really doesn't outweigh the benefit of it.
That's good to know. Especially like when traveling between states. That's really good to know. So what are some, sorry, what should someone expect when using cannabis for the first time?
That depends. My favorite answer always. It really comes down to how you're approaching cannabis. Are you being guided? I would say don't expect a silver bullet result. Most of the time, people are going to go low and slow, so it may be several weeks before they actually feel the biggest benefit from cannabis. So, a lot of times I have people who have been talking to their friends or neighbors or loved ones who've been using it successfully, but it can take a while to get there. So I would say lower your expectations so that, you don't give up on it too soon.
So something else that's kind of floating to the top is, are there any alternatives to cannabis that would still provide some similar or the same benefits? Because you talked about so many benefits, and I didn't realize it could be so beneficial in like the slides you brought up at the beginning with all of the different things that it can really affect. It is a very powerful and potent tool. But is there anything else or any alternatives to cannabis
I guess
use?
it would depend on what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, some people really do still struggle with cannabis because of the stigma and the prohibition over the years. So it can be really hard for them to accept cannabis as a medicine. I think there are if you're looking for a more natural approach, yes, there's other plant options out there. It's not my wheelhouse, but I know people have used things like different vitamins and echinacea and elderberry and things like that to help with different, immune support and stuff like that.
That's awesome. And like even with the elderberry and the echinacea, like what would those, because like you said, it depends on what the person's trying to accomplish or what they want to use it for. What would those kind of do? What are some of the areas would those particular remedies utilize? Like how could they help essentially?
A lot of the different herbs out there can help with immune support. Some herbs can help with menopausal symptoms that sometimes can come on as a result of, the anti-estrogen, anti-hormone therapy, like hot flashes. Some herbs can help with sleep. Some herbs can help with anxiety, like copaiba, I believe, is one of the up and coming sort of herbs that can help with anxiety and inflammation. They don't have the same federal, status as cannabis, so some people feel more comfortable with that too because they're legal.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Now you mentioned like 4 different types of ways that the cannabis plant can be used: CBDA, CBD, THCA, and THC. And so the question I've got here is cannabis addicting, or in any of those forms, is it addicting or habit forming? I think it may have
That's a
come up during
that's a really great question. We have studied THC extensively for its harms. And we know at this point that THC has about a 9% addiction rate, which is similar to your caffeine. Alcohol and tobacco are a little bit higher. So it does, in terms of, addiction rates, it's lower than some of the other substances out there. The research on CBD is still evolving. We've seen that CBD can actually block the pleasure reward center in our brain that's responsible for addiction. We're seeing some studies come out where they're using CBD to help people get off their opioids that are addictive, or heroin or some other substances. I even saw a study the other day about methamphetamine, using CBD to help get off methamphetamine. We've even seen some studies come out around tobacco. So the World Health Organization has classified CBD, particularly cannabidiol, as very safe and non-addictive.
I'm sorry, I feel like you're blowing my mind right now. Like with how CBD is being used to like help people who are addicts with other substances. That is, that's really wild to me. I think that's amazing. It's really
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. So you mentioned several times during our during your talk about how like it can be really overwhelming to go into a dispensary and like there's so many choices and there's so many and of course um, the folks who are helping they have a general knowledge but maybe not specific to this, but what would you, any advice for a person who's going into a dispensary for the first time, ways to kind of navigate that, questions they should ask, things that they should be maybe that they should be aware of when going into a dispensary for the first time, because it is, I'm sure it's kind of like going to a department store where there's all of the things. Yeah.
Yes. Some quick questions that you can ask are, I would say, really around safety. Is this product been tested for molds, pesticides, fungus? I think that's really important in the cancer population. Asking questions around, are there any additives in this? Wanting to know the purity of your product is really important. Looking for products where you can actually control the dose, again, like those tinctures, or you can just do a couple of drops. There are people out there, like where I live up here in Northern California, there's Rossmore, which is a retirement community of 55 and older adults. And they have an education and support group for medical cannabis patients. And part of that group is really to mentor and support people who are new to it, who may not know how to do it. So, bring a friend, talk to somebody who's knowledgeable. I sort of discourage people from their grandkids because, a lot of time the grandkids have had their own experience and they kind of go, it's okay, grandma, it's okay, grandpa, you should try this. And that's where people can, accidentally overconsume and have a bad experience and then maybe never want to touch it again. So, trying to find a knowledgeable support person can be really helpful.
What other resources might you direct people to, either like reading materials? Because there is, I'm sure if somebody Googles it, there's just like you can Google anything, you get all of the answers. But what would somebody look for, like in reputable resources, things to find out more information? This talk was extraordinarily informative. I personally learned some things as well. But anything else that you might direct a person to kind of gather resources as they're figuring out what the best choice is for them?
Yes, my favorite is projectcbd.org. They put out science-based articles. They work with clinicians to provide that information to you. There are, of course, healthcare professionals that are starting groups. There's Society of Cannabis Clinicians. They provide resources for patients, as well as like a practitioner finder, if you want to look up somebody. I'm the president of the American Cannabis Nurses Association. We're working towards educating nurses so that they can provide more, evidence-based education to patients who are curious about using it. Dr. Google is dangerous. They did do a study looking at the information on the websites, and they found that of the 30 websites they looked at, only one of them was written by a healthcare professional. So you have to be really careful about what information you're getting and where you're getting it from.
Can you tell us the website one more time? Project what?
CBD.
Projectcbd. Perfect.
.org.
Awesome. And so another question that's coming up is, are there any tips if the effect of cannabis is too strong? So if somebody's just like, oh, wait, more than I anticipated, what might you suggest they do?
Right, the antidote. Well, typically that's going to occur from THC versus CBD. And side effects, can be that increased heart rate, feeling anxious, sometimes even paranoid. There has been some animal research to say that CBD can counteract that anxiety, but not necessarily after the fact. Usually you want your CBD and THC together to reduce that effect. But what I would say is if you have overconsumed, try to drink a lot of water, try to walk around, watch a movie, distract yourself, call somebody. A lot of times you just have to ride it out, unfortunately. I personally haven't found anything that the internet tells you to use, like black peppers or taking CBD. A lot of those things are really anecdotal at this point.
That's perfect. All right. And so I think we've come to the end of our questions, Dr. Eloise, and we are so glad again to have you with us. Thank you so much for all of the incredible information you've shared. And to our audience who's watching, thank you all for joining us. Please feel free to check the on-demand section of our our platform. We also have an author's corner, resources, survivor testimonials via the links above. This talk will be added to our on-demand section so that you can watch it again or share it with friends and family. It was really informative. I'm sure they would also enjoy it. If you want to know more about the Pink Ribbon Place and our no-cost services, please visit our website at pink.rchf.org or visit us on Facebook or Instagram at the Pink Ribbon Place. At the end of our conference, we watch out for a survey email where you can let us know how we did and have the opportunity to win some of our fabulous prizes. Our next live session and our closing keynote will be patient advocacy and cancer data working together, which will be available to watch live this morning at 10:30 a.m. To watch that talk or see what's coming next, visit the schedule link above. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Bye, everyone.